And we do have an awful lot of things to go over tonight, and that's the reason that I did not have you all present as groups your different PowerPoints, but I have looked at the PowerPoints, and what you came up with is very good. So I'll just say that now, and then we'll talk about that a little bit later. At the first of your agenda, and I will try to share a little bit, but at the first of your agenda, let's see if this is it. No, that's not it. This is it. It's just some reminders for you to continue to look at. Complete your OMA just as soon as you can, and all of you have done really well. The ones that have been turned in and that have been posted to TaskStream, you all have done really well, and so that is wonderful. For those who have not finished, just a reminder of what Task 4 is. It's where you are looking at course content, the internship, and artifact development, and how that has helped you. Let's see, I'm going to see if I can mute. I don't need to mute me. I need to mute the rest of you. Or will all of you mute yours, because I'm hearing some kind of strange noises right now. Okay. Anyway, it's where you're thinking about what you've done in your coursework, your readings, your discussions, your discussion boards, your internship, your actual activities, and your artifact development, and how all of those have helped you become competent in the 12 that you have chosen to reflect on for that particular competency. And then just to make sure that everybody understands, you submit your compiled OMA to turn it in my class shell under the assignment Dropbox. And the process at that point is I will give you what the Turnitin score is. And for the OMA, they allow up to 60 points. And then I will tell you, once I give you that score, to submit your full document to TaskStream for evaluation. And the screenshot place for you to submit your actual score is in week 8 of the class shell. I wanted to give you plenty of time to get there. Now, what I did in this next section on the case study, which you have, but I'm showing it to you right here, I went ahead and took the information that some of you had a hard time finding about the 4 paradigms of ethics. I took that information and I added a little bit of clarification to some of the things that was in the document that Dr. Lamb had posted. So that's just there for your information. What I wanted us to talk about, you've all had a chance to, in your small groups, discuss the case study that was dealing with Bobby, and it was dealing with plagiarism, and it was dealing with, there were a lot of issues, and you brought them out. You brought the issues out in your PowerPoints and in your reflections. One of the issues was, how come this one assignment was going to be the major point of the grade and could fail the student for the whole semester? In high school, you don't usually find that. That's the kind of thing you might find in a college course. But even in most college courses, you're going to have more than 2 assignments. So that was one of the issues you were dealing with. And then one of the issues you were dealing with was the term may that was used in the policy that was being used in the school. And then one of the feeling was the feeling of the teacher, and then your feeling as the administrator, and how those sometimes do not always match. So all of that, you all did a really good job in looking at the whole set of issues that were being dealt with in that particular case study. So what I want us to do is to look at these questions. That's just as a group, I want you to respond. So of course, unmute yourself and please respond. After completing this assignment in your groups, what do you feel was the biggest concern that your group had about this particular case study?
I'll speak up first. Our group, I would say we had two concerns. One of the concerns was, did the student actually have a chance to tell his side of the story? Because they said that he admitted to the guilt, but did he really have a chance to tell his side of the story? And then the other one was kind of, you already hit on that, whether or not that one grade should cause the student to fail. And we kind of focused on the word may, because it said it may, but that was one of our big discussions, whether or not one grade should cause him to fail.
And that's really good. And I also noticed that many of you were looking at from how to salvage the student. And that is, when you get into administration, it's not a catch you and I've got you because of something you did, but how can you take what they've done and help them learn from it, but still salvage their learning for that semester? All right, what were some of the other concerns that another group may have had?
So I'll chime in, and forgive me, I have my 1-year-old here, so you guys hear him.
That's okay.
But one of the things that Melissa and I talked about was the being consistent. So the superintendent said, what you decide to do, you do what you do, but tread lightly. And we were talking about, okay, just a minute. We were talking about being consistent across the board. So if other instances of this ever came up, would what we do with this young man be the same that we would do for other people? And is it, are you treating him like this because of his relationship with his uncle or whoever the sponsor was? So we were talking about those kind of issues and making sure that we're being, not being impartial and remaining fair and consistent. Okay, shh. Mommy's talking.
Okay, and that's good too. What about some of the rest of you?
One of the things we talked about was that it should be like just based on facts, and like the student did admit to cheating, but like somebody else said earlier, like he still needs to be able to tell his side of the story, and I mean, I'm in leadership, right now, working alongside with my principal and assistant principal, and things just aren't black and white. I mean, you really do have to handle situations one by one, and it's hard because teachers want, hey, if this happens, then this happens. But I mean, you have to like look at like the underlying circumstances and things like that, and it's hard. I mean, but you just do the best you can.
One of the things that I have found over the years is the students who seem to have the hardest time are the ones who want everything in black and white when they go into administration. They're so sure that if this happens, then this should happen. Mm-hmm. But in administration, and a lot of times in discipline in the classroom, it is not black and white. It is in gray. And that's a lot of the things that you all deal with is the gray. And yes, you have the policies to support you, but you also have your own biases. Now, this particular case study had some interesting pieces in it. You had the uncle who was on the Board of Education. He was also a businessman, and he was with the Chamber of Commerce, and so he was involved with that. He loved sports, and his nephew played sports and was quite good at it. Some people have a tendency, if you're dealing with this kind of family, to go extremely hard on them. Other people have a bias that you got to pay attention to where they are and what effect it can have on you, and so they go light. Well, the truth of the matter is, and you all hit on it, you don't need to excuse for one and not another. So if you're going to allow this to be handled lightly, any child who comes through with similar circumstances, you need to do the same way. But there is a lot of reality that you need to be very careful about. And this is where your ethics show. in how you handle those things. You know, can you come to a compromise that you could live with all of the students, regardless of their financial situation or the influence of the parent? But whatever you set up in this kind of situation, you need to be able to be consistent with it, because it's telling who you are. So are there any other concerns that you all wound up thinking about and talking about in your group?
Yeah, I wanted to respond to what Kelly said also, and what you just said. Today, in talking to some teachers, there's this sort of perception sometimes that the administration's not doing anything. I'm pretty sure, like, we've all been at schools, perhaps, well, maybe, where there is an assertion that administration is just not doing anything. So there's this idea that you have to handle every situation case by case, and then this expectation from teachers that things happen very quickly, very immediately, and very harshly. So how do you balance that? Maybe whoever's either in positions or whatever can respond. How do you balance the need to handle discipline so that teachers feel good and they feel like things are happening, so that they can control their own classes and they can do what they're doing and feel safe in that, but also considering the extra situations, the case-by-case scenarios.
So you're asking me how to balance that? Is that what you're asking?
Well, I'm asking anybody who wants to respond because I just want some input on that. How,
all right.
And I feel like it plays a role into this sort of scenario.
And you're exactly right. The perception that teachers have of you is very different from the perception that the parents have about you.
Right.
One of the things you have to do is educate your teachers. One of the first things that, as a principal, when you are new to a place, that you need to do is educate your teachers in what you can do and what you cannot do. If you really look at it, one of your discussion board questions is, what is it that the principal can actually do that the teachers can't do? Well, the main thing that they can do that you can't do is they can suspend. And they can suspend in school and out of school, and that's just about the only thing that they can do that a teacher doesn't have the same ability to do. The other thing, that one of the questions was, what is it you have to have the superintendent's permission for? Well, that's expulsion. Anytime you expel one or go beyond a limited amount of days, 10 days, then you usually have to have your superintendent's approval for that. So your teachers need to understand that they have as many tools at their fingertips as you do, with the exception of suspension. And if they're wanting the child expelled, then it's got to go to your central office. It's got to go to your superintendent or their designee at the central office. There's also another group, and this is where I had an issue with, and I struggled with it, and I finally came to the realization, okay, if I can't suspend an EC child when they started a fight for more than 10 days, then I'm not going to suspend anybody for up to 10 days. And so when it dawned on me that there's one set of rules for EC children and another set of rules for regular ed kids, then I started backing off on the number of days that I suspended anybody, because I wanted, first of all, to be fair and consistent. Well, you have to follow the laws with EC, and if it ever gets to more than 10 days, you have to have a manifestation meeting, whereas you have a group of people together and you talk about, is this something that's related to whatever the handicapping condition is? Well, if it's not, then you can suspend, but you better have some really good records that can show that it has nothing to do with that handicap condition. If it happens to be a BEH child and they've done something inappropriate, can you ever prove that it's not connected to their handicapping condition? I don't know if you can or not. I mean, that takes somebody a whole lot smarter than me to be able to do that. So therefore, I'm just not going to deal with it. The other thing is you usually have to have the superintendent's approval if you move them from their regular educational environment to an alternative school. So, you know, the first thing you need to let your teachers be aware of is they have a lot of things they can control. And then when it comes to you, you don't have many more things than what they've already got. And then your superintendent doesn't have but basically one tool beyond that. If it is illegal, you take it to the police department and you let them handle it. So, you know, that's one of the things you have to do is get your staff to understand it. Generally, if you can work with your teachers and get them to understand that you're working against 2 or 3 different problems, then you can get them to work with you, and they'll see that if they send the student to you, you're going to do something with them. It doesn't have to be major, but you do something. You support the teacher. Many times my teachers, when I was a principal, would be at their wit's end, and they just needed the student out of their room for a little while. So they'd send them to the office and I'd keep them. And then I asked the teacher what it was they wanted me to do. And the teacher would say, well, this is, or I'd say, what is it your student needs help with? Well, they don't know their multiplication tables. So that would become the punishment I would give them. Is whatever, if they had spelling words that they didn't know, if they had multiplication tables that they didn't know, that would be what I would make them do, something that would go back to what their problem was and something that they needed to learn. Well, the teachers then realized that I'm trying to help them. So much of what goes on between a teacher and a principal is tied to relationships, and it's how they see you and how they perceive you. And if they believe you're really trying to help them, they will try to help you. And it's not an us versus them, it's a working together. So does that help anybody? Anybody have any other ideas? Any other comments about that one?
When you say that, because like I'm like in the middle right now, I'm the instructional facilitator, so I work with the principal and assistant principal and leadership, but I'm not administration, but I also work closely with the teachers and PLT daily. And like one thing with that, because we have a new principal, but when they are sent to the office, you know, they are taken out of class. I mean, our principal does not suspend. It does not matter what it is. It's physical altercations, does not suspend. And so I've been questioning her, like reading all these laws. I'm like, you know, are you putting it in Power School? Or are you putting it in Swiss? I don't know if she liked all the questions that I'm asking because I'm finding out a lot. But one thing with the teachers, like they just want to know what was done. You know, because we went from PBIS to doing restorative practices. And, you know, they want to know, okay, if you are taking them out of the class into the office, what are you doing with them? So my suggestion, just send a quick little email saying this is what we did. Yep. And you move on, because once they're out of the teacher's classroom, then it's really up to the principal or assistant principal what their consequence is.
That's right.
But it's also nice for the teachers to know that something is being done.
Now, I have probably a different opinion than most people do about where you put discipline information. I did not want it to go on their record if they were young children. Because think about it, little kids, they're just trying to learn how to get along in a group. So we did, you know, I never recorded anything on a form that would be sent to central office or could be electronically found until they got to middle school to high school. If it was up until that time, then I would keep notes on it. So I would have it, and I kept those notes from year to year, but I didn't actually put it in a computer that it would be found against them. Now, you know, some people put every living thing in the computer because they trust the computer. But, you know, when I was doing it, it wasn't that I didn't trust the computer. It wasn't as advantageous to us because we didn't have that many in the schools. I mean, you have to think about when I was a principal, computers were just coming in. So I kept note cards on every child I ever saw, and the teachers knew that I did. I kept to date what they did and what I did to them. And all the teachers ever had to do was come and ask me if I forgot to tell them. But most of the time they knew, because when I took them back to the classroom, I told them, I said, this is what I did with them. I hope this is what you wanted. And they said, that's fine. You know, we just want to make sure that they understood that they can't do this in this room. And so, you know, most of the time Kelly is right. They just want to know that something's being done. So it's a combination of training as to, you all have a lot of power, don't give it up. And the second one is communicating back as to, this is why. Now, Kelly, you're in a K-5 school, is that right? I suspect that is the reason your principal does not suspend. If the principal were middle school to high school, I suspect you'd see more suspensions. But when they're K-5, it's hard to figure out when you should start suspending them, because they need to be at school more so than they need to be at home where nobody's looking after them.
And that's the thing, like, we're
in better shape with you.
Well, and that's like what we're studying, like the restorative practices, like the prison, when students, like, you know, don't stay in school, and, you know, then the dropout rate, like where that goes. And it's hard. It's just like a mind shift. And it's taken a lot of time for everybody, because at first I was like, no, like if they do this, this should happen. But really it's like getting them in, talking to them, finding out like really what caused it. And, you know, they do have consequences. It's just, it's not going to be suspension, because they're better off at school with us than they probably are at home.
Do you feel like there's more creativity in that model?
Was that a question? I think Joy's asking, do you feel like there's more creativity in that model, Kelly?
It's hard. You know, it really is, because this is the first time that the principal on Saturday had 3 kids stay after, because she wanted them to come in and give back to the community, which is where, like, they acted up.
Wait, what school do you go to? What school is this?
But I'm at Smith Farm Elementary, and I'm in Forsyth County. But the teachers are not on board. I mean, there's very, very few, because we were a PBIS school. So it's, if you were written up this many times, this is what happens. And teachers, they want a guide to go by. So with the restorative practice, it's hard because there's not a guide. Like, it's a case by case.
Yeah.
And some respond to me, some respond to the principal, some the assistant principal, and whoever they respond to is who's going to deal with it.
And that's true. That's true.
And I do try to assure them, I'm like, you know, we're doing the best we can, and I promise you it's taken care of. Like, I'm kind of in the middle, so they trust me.
That's right.
Yeah, so.
When you change the role, that trust will go away.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else about that first question? Because I looked at my time and we're going to have to move on. In your groups, did you all come to an agreement that all of you felt good about?
Yes.
Yes. And what was your, what did you all come, what agreement did you come to that you felt good about?
In our group, we agreed that the student should have a road to redemption. So we were talking about perhaps the first time around was the F for the plagiarism, but then the student had maybe a week to do the assignment correctly, get whatever grade they got, and either that became their grade or the grade was averaged with the F that they got originally. So there still was some type of consequence attached to it, but the learning still happened. And one thing that I did want to say about the previous question is we also talked about the due process. And in the case study, it talked about the teacher telling the principal what had happened with the student, and the principal talking to other people, but it didn't talk about the principal talking directly to the student. All the information was secondhand information. I feel like that was missing in the case study, and perhaps in the, you know, if it was all fleshed out that happened. But within the case study, the principal did not actually speak with the student himself, and had the parents in with the student to discuss the situation and possible ways to rectify that. So we felt like that was a missing component as well in the case study.
And that is a good point. And that is one thing that when you become an assistant principal or principal and you're dealing with discipline, you're going to want to talk to the student. And you're going to want to talk to all of those involved. And if it comes to contacting the parents, then you want to be involved in that as well. So you do need to hear from everybody. That's an important piece. Was there any group that didn't feel that they came to a solution that everybody could agree on? Okay. What did you learn about yourself as you considered the questions that went with this particular case study? Do you have biases that you realized that you had that you weren't sure of?
I think for me, and I guess just to piggyback off of Carrie a little bit as well, getting the students' side, I understand as far as like the due process, and I get it. But for me, every now and then, it's really rare that I get a student that's really gonna say, "Hey, I did cheat. I'm sorry." So that's the struggle, I have sometimes. And it takes a lot of discernment. It takes a lot of again, if you had that relationship with the student, you would know what type of characteristics they have, maybe even talking to the student's teacher. But, it's for me, it's just tough taking what they say at face value.
And I think that's a real good caution to have too. Students do lie. Parents lie. And you have to realize that parents will lie if it's going to involve something that they're going to have to change about their life for their kid. So you do need to think about all of those things. And I used to always say, whenever I was talking to a student, I'm going to tell you, and I followed this. If you tell me the truth up front, and I don't have to spend all morning finding out that you're lying to me, then your punishment's going to be half what it would be if you lie to me and I spend all morning trying to find out, and then I find out you've lied to me. And I used to tell them that up front. And in more situations than not, they would just tell me the truth, because I had been there long enough that they got it. Because, there were some of them that wouldn't do that. So yeah, I would give them a tougher punishment because they had lied about it. And I had told them that up front and they didn't believe me. So I followed what I did more than I normally would have done. But the ones who said, yes, I did that, and this is why, then I would try to give them the benefit of the doubt and a lighter punishment. They got a punishment, but it would be lighter because they told me the truth. I went to a school, and I told some of you this, but I went to a school that was a rural, it was in the mountain area, and it was poor, very poor. So think about those three things. And in that community, fighting was okay. If you didn't like something, you just got in a fight. But it was fists. It wasn't shooting. It wasn't knives. It was just fists. Well, when I arrived at the school, I thought, okay, I've been in schools and we've never had fighting. I'm not going to put up with it here. And so I wound up, the first year I was there, if students got in a fight, and this was a pre-K 8th grade, so it was usually 7th and 8th graders, then I would give them out of school suspension. And toward the end of the year, my superintendent called me. He said, Barbara, you do know that when you are suspending them out of school, you're hurting your attendance rate. And I said, Mr. Lyle, I do know that. And let me tell you, it will change next year. But I have to change the climate of the school. The school felt it was okay to fight. And I have to get the message out that you are not going to fight at school. I don't care what you do, but you are not going to fight at school because somebody can get hurt. After that first year, each year thereafter, I had almost, very few suspensions for the entire year. And my last year there, I only had to suspend 2 kids, And I wouldn't have had to have done that, except it was sexual harassment issues, and you can't let those go. And it was a girl and a boy that just got mad at each other. And I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was under the sexual harassment area. So once you get a reputation as an administrator, then the school culture starts changing about what you will allow and won't. But you usually have to take a hit the first year. And then after that, it gets much, much better. So,
one of the things I found myself having strong feelings about was people who have connections, like the young man whose uncle was, he had all these connections to sponsor and big sport. I felt myself feeling like, okay, they're going to feel like they're above the law. And they're going to feel like because the uncle is the sponsor and he likes sports and the nephew's on the baseball team, that we should cut them some slack. And I know you may mention that sometimes people feel like they need to be harsh on them. And that wasn't what I was feeling, but I was feeling like they're going to feel like because of that, they're going to automatically, this is just going to go away. And so that was weighing in the back of my mind the whole time. I was talking to Melissa, my partner, about it. Like, we can't just totally dismiss it, but I do want to send a message, and I do want to be fair, but I don't want to just let this student just get away scot-free because of his connection in the community.
And you can't. You can't. You've got to be fair, and you've got to be consistent. Many of those parents that may have those connections, I've seen it where they said, you treat my kid like everybody else. I don't want any special treatment. You treat him the same way you would anybody else. The real question is whether the teacher did some things that the teacher shouldn't have done. And that's where it gets sticky, because when a teacher doesn't use the best judgment in the world, then sometimes it causes you to have to side against them because they're not being fair to the student. So that's where you look for compromise, and you look for creative ways to come up with a compromise. And we've already talked about why would anybody have maybe basically 2 assignments and one could fail the kid for the whole semester. That's not good practice at any level, but especially not in middle or high school. So there are those times. And then what you all think about, and I don't have it there, but what you think about her bringing her union representative? Of course, that didn't happen in North Carolina because we don't have a union. But what'd you think about that? What was the purpose of that? Why did the teacher do that?
Maybe because she knew that because of the pool, I guess this, I forgot his name in the case study, may have some weight, and she just wanted to make sure that she had some of that weight behind her as well. So that's my thought process is behind it.
And I think that's a very good way of looking at it. I think partially it also may have been that if she thought the administration could be swayed by having this union rep, she was trying to put pressure on the administration instead of dealing with the administration directly herself. So that tells you a little bit about how that teacher felt about the people she worked with. So, it gets really difficult to figure out why people do what they do. But why didn't she just go talk to this school administrator? If she had had a really good relationship with that administrator, that'd been the first thing I would have done. I mean, I used to be the kind of teacher when I lost my temper and I knew that I'd go in and say, okay, this is what I did today. This is why. And in case you get a call, this is what happened. And when I was the principal, when I knew that I'd really ticked off parents who were like the parent, the uncle, had some connections, I'd call the superintendent and I'd say, okay, this is what I did. This is why I did it. You just need to know. And, most of the time you can head that off. And if you've got that kind of a relationship with your boss, you shouldn't get to where you need that union rep. So there was something going on there for her to need that union rep. So I would always say if the teacher feels the need for that outside person or a lawyer, there's more to the picture than what you're seeing. There's something else going on. Did anything surprise you, or what surprised you the most in your group discussion? Did anything surprise you?
I don't think we had any surprises in our discussion. I think it was just we had some differences of how we approached it, but in the end, we were able to come together to come up with a common idea of what should happen, and kind of following the procedural manual and contacting, like you said, contacting someone above us to, this is what we did. We want your support on this decision.
Okay. All right. Well, does anyone have anything else that you want to, that's just really important for you to mention before we move to the next thing, which is to introduce you to the SCIP, Task 1? Anything else about the case study? All right, I have gone to the document that has Task 1 of the SCIP. And I posted in this week's information Dr. Lamb's town hall meeting last night. And some of you were there. If you weren't, that is fine, because I posted it, you can view it. But what I'm going to do, instead of lumping them all together like I did last time, is I'm going to go through one at a time. And so because we don't have but about 25 minutes left, I'm going to go quickly, and if you have any questions, please ask me. Looking at what you're supposed to do, this is needs assessment only for communication. Make sure you realize that what you're looking for is a needs assessment related to communication. The other key terms are internal and external communities. Internal means the people in your building, the ones that you're interacting with on a regular basis every day. External means your community. That can include the parents, that can include your business leaders, it can be the grandparents, but it's the key people around your school. And so that is what your prompt 1 is, a needs assessment. You're looking for gaps, and the gaps are strictly communication between the internal and external communities. And then it goes ahead and said, this is what's got to be in here. So as I've told you before, I believe strongly in subheadings. Make sure it's all there. Background description of the setting would be one of the subheadings. Clear statement of the purpose of your needs assessment would be another one. You could probably lump those two together, or you could put your purpose, and it doesn't have to be particularly in this order, but this is the way they have it, and the rubric has it in this order too. Who participated, and when did they stop being active? When were they active, and when did they stop? What did you find? That's your analysis. And then this last 2 parts is really important. A recommendation that identifies avenues of communication. Now, Dr. Lamb last night in his information was saying the recommendations here are talking about avenues of communication. And I'm looking on my notes because I thought I put more information about that. And that would be Facebook, Twitter, any of those kinds of ways that you would communicate. Does your school have a call program that they can get all of your parents at one time? That would be one of those. So it's how would you use these different things? Now, the second part that he was looking for, he said, I better see the recommendations for the avenues. I better see recommendations for short-term and long-term. So I would probably split this one up and maybe have 2 subheadings, short-term and long-term. And for the short term, he was looking for how is it you're going to connect. In other words, which one of those avenues of communication are you going to use to try to solve this closing of the gap? The long-term objective, which it really doesn't say this, and you have to read a lot between the lines to get to where he was looking for it. His long-term objective is something that you plan at your school to get the parents to come in that's going to help the students increase in their academic performance. Now, when you read this, do you see that anywhere? No, you don't. But after he explains it, it makes sense. But you have to take some leaps to get there. But since that's what he's wanting, that's what we need to do. So you will have, for prompt 1, you'll have the description of the setting. Now, you've already done that. So you can cut and paste. A lot of this, if you've already done it, you cut and paste. The needs assessment, again, is just on gaps in communication. And it's between internal and external communities. And then you have your how you're going to communicate, and then what are you going to do in the short term, and what are you going to do in the long term. And that long term thing, he wants to be something that you have at your school that gets the parents to come in. Now, the second prompt is where you're looking at some type of survey. Now, he recommended North Carolina Teacher Working Conditions Survey if you're in North Carolina. I think he recommended, was it Advanced Ed in South Carolina? And he only wants you to look at the topic of leadership. He doesn't want you to look at teacher leadership, just leadership. Now, North Carolina only does that teacher working conditions survey every 2 years. There are probably surveys that you've done for Title I or for other things where you've had to submit to the state that may have more accurate information. And so if that's the case, you feel free to use it. Just make sure you clarify where you got your information from. So this is talking about the climate of the school, and he's wanting to look at primarily the leadership. I'm going to tell you a little story that goes with that. A school often will take on the personality of the principal, and you think, how can they do that? That, you know, the principal's not there that long, but over a year or two, if the principal is always calm, the school will be calm, and you can sense it when you walk into a school. If the principal is really antsy and nervous and all that, everything in that school is going to be antsy and nervous. You know, not everybody, but that's why I keep telling you, you really have got to be calm. I don't care how you are feeling inside. You cannot let others see you that way, or things just happen that should never happen at a school when they feel that the leadership is out of control. So, you know, what kind of surveys are out there that will help you figure out what it is that the leadership of your school, which is primarily your principal and assistant principal, what do people think about them, and what is that contributing to the climate of your school? So anyway, you're to analyze the information you have, and then it says the candidate should evaluate the school leadership and use the evaluation as a validation instrument for the teacher working conditions survey or the climate survey. So look at whatever information you have, and as you think about it, does that portray fairly clearly what you're seeing and the way you see it? And so in the past, they have suggested that you do something with a group that is representative of your school. You can have a focus group and you can talk about it, or you can do an anonymous survey. But Dr. Lamb is not really pushing for you to do that, but somehow you've got to get to a point that you feel that the information that's portrayed that was done earlier is still accurate in your school. So however you do that, just describe how you're going to do that. You know, if you decide to do it in a focus group of people that are representative, if you decide to do an anonymous survey, you're looking to validate what information you already have. I wouldn't spend a great deal of time on that. I would just do a little bit, but it does say that. So what you're supposed to include in this organizational analysis is the background of the organizational setting. Some of that you've already got. The participants who helped you go through this. Then a detailed description of the procedures used for the data collection and the analysis. And then the last part of this is what recommendations you would make for the school improvement plan. So that is the things that are on the task 1 of the SCIP. And so you can get started on that as soon as you finish the OMA, and you will be able to move rather quickly, I think, because it's not a massive undertaking. One thing to remember, you want to cut and paste minimally. Make sure it applies directly to what you're doing, because what is happening that I'm noticing is when you cut and paste a lot and you've already used it in previous documents, your Turnitin score goes up. But if you are just using the minimal part, then your Turnitin score stays lower. So be careful on that little piece. And I put some information for you that I went ahead and bulleted out for you. That's a summary of what I just went over for prompt 1 and prompt 2. Someone had a question.
Yes. Since you brought up the Turnitin, what was the number this time for the OMA Turnitin? 60? 60.
So if it was below 60, you were fine. If it was right at 60 to 63, I let it go because I would look back and I thought that maybe you copied a lot of some information from some of the others that were already gone through Turnitin. And so, but that was the score that he allowed for the 60. And if it was real close to that, I let it go on because I thought, okay, this is something with what we're doing here.
Okay.
Rather than, it's not them plagiarizing anything. It's just something that we're doing and we're allowing.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anybody else have a question? All right.
I have a question.
Dr. Time.
Yes.
What's the difference in the background of prompt 1 and the background of prompt 2?
All right. Let's see if I can get it to move up. I'm not sure I can get it to move up. All right. The background of the organizational setting would be more about the actual school. And the first one is actually more about your school and how it operates within the community. So the organizational setting is going to be how the school operates, and then the others, the description of the setting is going to be more about the school and the community. Okay, does that help any? I think you're just going to have to get into it and see what it's really looking for. But
Last night, Dr. Lamb mentioned that the background setting in prompt 1 is the school profile that we've used several times.
Yes.
And then in prompt 2, it's the organizational structure from the OMA.
Yes. And that's that's basically the same thing I was talking about, is the description of your school is what you've got for the first one, which was background setting. It's talking about your school and your community. And then the second one is how it's organized. And you're correct. I think he did spell it out that way. And I put that in your notes too, that it can come from the OMA.
So, sorry, I have a question. So, with the state who I guess is reviewing these, why do we have a background for every task?
I can't give you the answer to that because I didn't create it. I don't know.
I mean, do you see any value in it? Like, can you understand the value that they may be communicating to you?
I think, and actually the state does not evaluate this.
Okay.
Gardner-Webb has hired evaluators that come in. The state comes in to evaluate Gardner-Webb's program, and they may select maybe the 10th one of every class to look at to see if what they're doing is the same thing Southern Association does when it comes in to visit a school. They're looking to see if Gardner-Webb students did what Gardner-Webb said they were going to do. And that's why in North Carolina, the DPI has approved the plan. So that's why you have to follow it until DPI says you've got to revise it. And we can't make too many changes. I think probably the reason it was put in there is to help people if they're, see, this is set up over 5 semesters, which would be 2.5 years. And a lot of things can, or at least 2 years, a lot of things can happen in school that different from year to year. You've got a different principal that may affect the climate. Sometimes the schools are split up. Sometimes you have schools combined. And so if something has happened that's major like that, then it needs to be reflected that somewhere something has changed. So I suspect that that's what it is. You all are just fortunate enough or unfortunate enough to have to do it all in 3 semesters. So it's basically a year that you're dealing with. But if this were like when it was originally planned, it was for 5 semesters. So it would take over 2 years to be able to do it. And a lot of things do change. So I think that's why, and that's why Dr. Lamb says, okay, cut and paste. We're not going to make you redo this unless something's changed. And most of the time, if you start in the fall and the spring and the summer, it's not going to change. Now, next year it might change. But, you know, in that situation, it's probably not going to change. So I think more than anything, the other part of that would be the evaluator is only going to be looking at one task at a time. And so it's been a semester or it's been a half of a semester before they've seen the information about your school. And so it might help them to understand what they're reading and why you made some of the decisions that you made if they knew a little bit. Is this an urban school? Is this a rural school? Is this a poor school? Is this an affluent school? You know, that's why I tell you, you need to talk about your community and what resources are available to the community. Some of you are just like the schools I was in. You didn't have many community resources at all because you were in a poor area. And so you used whatever you could find from anywhere. And some of you are very fortunate to be in places where you have a lot of affluence. And so you've got people who can come in and do volunteering and tutoring and those kinds of things free of charge. Others of you don't. You have to pay somebody to do anything extra that you get done in your school. All right, any other questions?
Can I ask a question, Dr. Todd?
Sure.
So one of the things in thinking about external communication, if we had access to parent surveys, could we utilize that?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
And some of you will have that information because I know if you've done Title I or some of the other plans for some of the programs we're using, there is a component that requires a parent survey. And I think sometimes for rewriting the EC and the AIG plans, you need that. So yes, that would be very helpful. If you can find that information from your school, that would be very helpful.
Thank you.
I'm glad you asked the question. All right, any other questions? All right, just make sure that you have the strengths, the weaknesses, and the recommendations, because Dr. Lamb made a point to say that. And then I went ahead and looked at the proficient. What the rubric says is to be proficient in the needs assessment for prompt 1 has the setting, the statement of purpose, who participated and what were their roles, what did you find, and what recommendations do you have. For the organizational analysis, you have the organizational setting, the participants, detailed procedures used for collection of your data and your analysis, and recommendations for the school improvement plan.
Dr. Todd.
Yes.
Oh, you can hear me. Good. All right. Question about the about the external community. Is that something like we're supposed to do, like a survey or ask questions, or just for them to participate about
Do you have talk with your administrators and see if you've got any kind of information that they've used in previous reports that tells you about your external community. If they have to do a report, now you're at the high school, right, Clarence?
Middle school.
Middle school. All right, if they have to do reports to get Title I funds or EC funds, it's possible you've got that parent information there. So try to find it rather than to have to go out and redo it just simply because of time. So if you can find it from any source, just write where the source came from. If you wind up not having it and you need to do a brief survey, I'd probably go with a focus group. That way you could get the people to come in, meet with you, and you could ask, their perceptions, and you could ask what they feel is important about the items that you're looking for. But that's just simply my thought process. Just how you get the information, that's not the real issue. It's just that you have it, and then that you cite your reference as to where you got it.
Gotcha.
Okay. Again,
Yes,
we're trying to get so much done that we're not asking you to recreate some of the stuff that if you had a whole semester to do it would be the ideal way to do it. That's the reason I suggested if you can't find anything in your school, I would try to probably pull together a group of focus group of parents that and maybe community members, community leaders that will be straight with you and give you honest feedback. You don't want somebody that just agrees everything you're doing is wonderful, but you also don't want somebody that hates everything that you're doing. You want a good group that will say, okay, this is what I see as your strengths. This is what I see as something that you need to work on.
All right.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, let me check the chats and see if there's anything we need to talk about. I think you're answering each other's questions, which is good. I don't see anything. I think what you all have answered is fine. The information you've shared is fine. Do want to make sure we get to this next piece is toward the end, and I know it's toward the end of our session too. This week, well, actually, next week is spring break for Gardner-Webb. Now, I'm not going anywhere, but you will have next Tuesday off. I'm not going to do a Zoom session next Tuesday, but the following Tuesday, we will have a Zoom session. So that's why I wanted to make sure we got the SCIP started, so that you could get that started and get it done, because you're actually going to have 2 weeks for week 8. So I want to make sure that you get started on the SCIP. You also are to do case study 3 this week. I'm not doing them in the order that they're listed, 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm doing them in the order where we've had the reading assignments about them. And case study 3 deals with chapter 5, which you've already read, and it also deals with cyberbullying, which is your assignment for reading this week. So that's the reason I put it there. Now, if we have time and we're not pushed for time, then I will have you do your PowerPoint presentation for each other at our next class. So tonight, I just didn't feel like we had the time in order for us to actually talk about the case as a whole group. So we will aim to do that for the case study 3. The place that you're to post your screenshot of your OMA is in week 8. And I think unless somebody's turned in anything since 4 o'clock today, I have gotten all of the turn it in sent back to you. I've got most of the other tasks finished. I've got just a few that you've turned in for evaluation that I've still got to go back and move on. But I think I'm down to maybe 4 or 5 assignments in each class. So I'm trying to get caught up. And so if you all will just keep working. If you finish with the OMA, start on the SCIP. If you have any questions, feel free to call me. Look at Dr. Lamb's town hall meeting that he had last night in case I have missed something. I've tried to take notes from his stuff and give them to you in the agenda, which is what you saw earlier. So do you have any other questions?
I just have a quick question in regards to the case study. On this most recent case study, you said if we answered those specific questions in our Zoom session, we didn't necessarily have to write a written response to those as well?
That's correct.
Do the same thing with this one on the 4 questions at the bottom. If we discuss them, we don't have to write them?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Your reflection is where you are thinking about, okay, what did I gain from this? What did we learn from this discussion? Is there something that now that I've had time to think about it that I would do differently, or I would think differently if I were in charge? So it's your reflection. It's you thinking about what you talked about and whether you still agree with that. But if you do that in your Zoom group, no, I don't need to see that because I'll see that when I see your posted Zoom session, or I'll see it in your presentation that you create. All right, any other questions? Did I confuse you, or did I help straighten things out? I'm hoping I helped.
I have one. You said, could you repeat what you said about not putting something? I was listening, but my son was leaving to go back home, and I didn't hear it.
I'm not sure what you're talking about.
When Kira just asked about not putting something in the Zoom session if we answered it or something.
Okay. All right. I said if you did it in the Zoom session, you do not have to write the answers in your reflection. The reflection is simply your thoughts about your group and the responses you came to and whether you would change anything. All right. Did that answer that? All right. Anything else that anybody has? Well, I hope you all have been, we've had sun today, and I hope you have too, and it just makes me feel so much better. So I hope that you all are enjoying the few days that we seem to be having sun. Maybe it'll get more later, but anyway, I enjoy the sun. So I hope you have a great week, and remember, next week is Gardner-Webb's spring break, but you will still, if you need to get caught up, get caught up. And then we will meet in 2 weeks. All right. Have a great evening.